Good afternoon. I'm Mike Van Dusen, Executive Vice President of the Woodrow Wilson Center, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the 12th Annual Czech and Slovak Freedom Lecture. Our featured speaker today will be Senator Petr Pithart, Vice President of the Senate of the Parliament of the Czech Republic. The Czech and Slovak Freedom Lecture was initiated at the Woodrow Wilson Center in November 2000 by the Czech and Slovak embassies here in Washington. The series commemorates the inspiring struggle for freedom by the Czech and Slovak peoples. The Wilson Center is proud to host this series, which is still co-sponsored by the Czech and Slovak embassies as well as the Friends of Slovakia and American Friends of the Czech Republic. I'm glad to thank Czech Ambassador Petr Gondolovich and Ambassador Peter Burian. I don't see Peter here, but he may be coming, of the Slovak Republic for their leadership in this. And I wish to acknowledge František Čabej, of the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee of the National Council of the Slovak Republic, and members of his delegation who I believe may be with us here. We also welcome Tom Dine, an old friend of the Center, an old friend of mine, President of American Friends of the Czech Republic, and Ambassador Bill Kambanis, Vice President of American Friends of the Czech Republic, as well as Ambassador Ted Russell, the founding chairman of the Friends of Slovakia, and Joe Senko, chairman of the Friends of Slovakia. I also want to acknowledge that Ambassador Ted Sedgwick is with us today, serving as the United States Ambassador to Slovakia. The Woodrow Wilson Center is the living national memorial honoring President Wilson, the 28th President of the United States. The center provides an essential link between the worlds of ideas and the worlds of public policy. We offer a nonpartisan center, safe political space for research and dialogue on topics of national and international significance. Created by an act of Congress in 1968, the Woodrow Wilson Center is supported by both public and private funds. Over the last decade, this lecture series has brought such speakers to the center as former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, Solidarity leader Adam Michnich, Czech President Václav Klaus, and Ivan Miklos, former Deputy Prime Minister of Slovakia. I'm honored to introduce today's speaker, Senator Petr Pithart, who is Vice President of the Senate of the Czech Republic and also served as Czech Prime Minister from 1990 to 1992. He has a long and distinguished career in the struggle for democracy and freedom. Mr. Pithart was active during the 1968 Prague Spring and became one of the most prominent dissidents against the communist regime. He belongs to the first group of signatories of the Charter 77, a human rights document, and he's a member of the Civic Forum, the political movement that pressed for freedom during the 1989 Velvet Revolution. The title of Senator Pithart's speech is, "Does the Czech Constitution provide a solid base for the nation's political health in comparison to the U.S. Constitution?" A very big subject. Please join me in welcoming Senator Pithart. Answer questions from here later.
Ladies and gentlemen, vážení přátelé, I do not intend to present to the distinguished audience any news from comparative constitutional law science. However, I hope that you will find interesting some comparisons between how politics works in the US on the one hand, which you are familiar with, and how it works in the Czech Republic on the other hand. In particular, I will speak about two institutions that take care of the Constitution of the Czech Republic more than other ones. First, I will speak about the Senate of the Parliament of the Czech Republic, where I have been active since its establishment in 1996 and where I was elected president 3 times. Then I will speak about the Constitutional Court of the Czech Republic, an analogy of the American Supreme Court. We currently live at a time of a crisis that is hard to capture, and at a time when public opinion and politics are polarized. The defeated ones, at least in the Czech Republic, are often tempted to refuse to recognize their defeat. They would therefore like to revoke the results of the voting instead of trying to win it next time. And exactly then is the role of the two above institutions absolutely essential, as they serve as protectors of constitutionality, in particular of the stable and unchangeable nature of Constitution, such as the role of the guardians of freedom. Freedom is unthinkable outside a stable and firm, agreed fundamental framework of rights and duties defined by the Constitution. The Constitution is then guarded by the court, in the United States by the Supreme Court, and in the Czech Republic by the Constitutional Court. And to close the logic of interdependence, the final word in creation of both the Supreme Court and the Constitutional Court is given via advice and consent, as you say, to the Senate. As for the United States, I believe that the major role played by courts is the most typical feature of the American political system. I am not sure if it is also the most democratic feature, but undoubtedly it is now useful for the freedom of people and citizens. However, I know that there are both academic and political discussions ongoing even here in the United States about whether this role is today perhaps too great. We even hear about the risk of juristocracy, not only in the United States, but currently also in the Czech Republic. The above warning words are mostly loudly voiced by our president and every now and then also by representatives of the executive power. We hear them almost always whenever Constitutional Court decides against the ruling majority. Juristocracy is used as a scare in the Czech Republic, simply as needed in a given moment. However, the intensity of interventions of the Czech Constitutional Court in politics is significantly lower compared with the United States. This is one of the reasons why nobody in the Czech Republic has yet recommended taking Constitution away from the courts, as Mark Tashnet has done in the US. Nevertheless, we have recently seen one more important new phenomenon. In both countries, there is a clear, undeniable, and steady decline in the authority of directly elected bodies in general, most notably of Parliament or the Congress. Is the authority and public trust, or the remains of trust, shifting away from directly elected bodies to non-elected or indirectly elected ones? This is at least what Fareed Zakaria implies. It is just an understandable or also a healthy trend. Moreover, we have to ask the question if Zakaria would today repeat his opinion again, knowing what role has been played and is still played, for instance, by central banks when financial crises occur and when they are tackled. What role does the Constitution play in that respect? In relation to constitutional courts in our countries, we have to ask whether a certain degree of this progressing judicialization of politics is healthy or an unhealthy tendency. It is indeed questionable whether it is right when an outvoted party, say in our Chamber of Deputies, hurries more and more often to Brno, where our Constitutional Court has its seat, to challenge adopted legislation on grounds of being unconstitutional. Where is the fine line that divides political disputes based on values from disputes about constitutionality? Constitutionality is also based on values, preferably on a far deeper level. How can we reliably make a difference between present and presumably shallower positions and more permanently rooted values and attitudes? Americans have been searching for answers to the above questions for a very long time. They nowadays more or less accept that the Supreme Court cannot stand outside of politics. Over the past weeks and months, we in Czech Republic have been lingering in the midst of government attempts to push through a fairly drastic reduction of the welfare state, provided the defeated parties do not learn to accept their political defeats during voting in Parliament. They will not only flood the Constitutional Court, but they will also rob it of its uniqueness and its irreplaceable value. Against the background of this lingering, let me now discuss the similarities and differences between the American and Czech system of constitutional courts. The formation of our Constitutional Court has been inspired by a similar process in the United States. In the Czech Republic, the President also nominates candidates to serve in the Constitutional Court and subsequently appoints them upon a prior consent granted by the Senate. In other words, the Senate actually elects constitutional judges out of those proposed by the President of the Czech Republic. In my opinion, there is no greater similarity in the constitutions of our countries than this procedural one. Besides, our senators are, just like yours, elected for a 6-year term, always a third at a time in a 2-year interval. However, the Senate in the Czech Republic does not represent the states of a federation, but rather 81 electoral districts with a 2-round majority system. Let me just note in this context that elections into the Chamber of Deputies, which is the lower chamber of our parliament, take place in 14 electoral districts that reflect our self-governing regions and the capital city of Prague. However, the system there is proportional. To elect, or rather to confirm, constitutional judges nominated by the President is actually one of the greatest powers of the Senate, which has been proven well over the past 15 years. The Constitutional Court, verified by the Senate, has already several times intervened in a major way in attempts to amend the Constitution or to evade it. I will go back to this issue later. However, it is clear that the Constitutional Court may not have intervened had its composition been different. Your Constitution, including its 27 amendments, has been in force and effect already for 223 years. The last of the 27 amendments was ratified in 1992. The American Constitution has thus been in force and effect 10 times longer than our Constitution. And even the latest amendment has been in force and effect longer than our Constitution, which is effective as of 1st of January 1943. However, even our Constitution has seen only minor changes over the hectic times. Those who prepared Constitution aimed to have a short, concise one, similar in type to yours. We wanted it to be as stable as possible. It means rigid, as constitutional lawyers say. If proven over time, this would be a similarity in our Constitution that may be perhaps the most important one. Such a brief, short constitutions may or even should be amended. However, the question is by whom, whether only by the ruling majorities in Parliament or by somebody else, for instance, by the judicial power. It seems to me, in any case, that the decision about the leeway for amending the Constitution was actually provided for by the person who prepared the Constitution, because the more detailed the Constitution is, the smaller leeway there is. Whereas the Constitution of interwar Czechoslovakia was inspired by the United States by using the same diction only in the preamble, the Constitution from 1992 was inspired by the United States mainly by provident brevity and inbuilt difficulty to amend it. I mean difficulty, not impossibility to amend it at all. I believe that it was the very good inspiration. It is enough to allow us to speak about the positive impact of American constitutionalism on Czech constitutionalism. However, this also means that we face similar problems like you, which naturally do not always have an easy solution. The United States has gradually started to regard the Supreme Court as a court that is not apolitical. That means as a court that is not and cannot be absolutely neutral towards the struggle for power, and that is not just an entity that interprets and decides purely formalistic disputes about the interpretation of words and sentences. Its interventions in politics as a sphere of struggle for power are therefore not illegitimate. Americans were the first ones to take this extremely difficult and even painful decision about the apolitical or political nature of the Supreme Court, and did this exercise also for us. They had 2 centuries to tackle the issue. In my country, we are also getting used to the fact that the illusion of the virgin-like apolitical nature of the Constitutional Court is not only impractical because it is too elusive, but that it is furthermore not correct. I am not saying that this debate is already over. Quite opposite. We are in the midst of the sharpest controversies. These controversies have immediate implication for the Senate. It is not only up to the President, but in the end also up to the Senate, what judges will in their 10-year term decide or refuse to decide disputes that have more or less political implications. Concise and rigid constitutions need a constitutional court that would not turn away with aversion from rulings which have immediate or indirect implications for politics as such. Provided a single step of the executive or legislative power is not prescribed by the Constitution in detail, there is an open space for an entity such as court. The court will then rule whether this or that step is not whether this or that step not prescribed by the Constitution is nevertheless in compliance with it and therefore legal, provided the Constitutional Court has authority and trust. Such a step may be deemed legitimate. For instance, in 2001, our Constitutional Court thwarted the attempt of the 2 strongest political parties to change the election system applicable to the lower chamber, it means the Chamber of Deputies, by a mere amendment to the Elections Act. They wanted to do so by ignoring the Constitution that lays down a system of proportional representation in the Chamber of Deputies. It was an extremely serious decision against a vast political majority, decision of court. That majority was back then formed in a bizarre relationship between the 2 strongest political parties and was called an opposition treaty. Its aim was to marginalize and subsequently in practice exclude the remaining political parties forever. The treaty between these 2 parties guaranteed in writing that provided the current opposition wins the following elections, the 2 strongest parties would then just exchange their position. It was understood all the arrangements of both parties should be valid hereafter, including the most horrible one, stating that the party in actual opposition has to refrain from the vote of no confidence in the government. In other words, it was an attempt to introduce a bipartisan political system, sometimes referred to as the Westminster system, by means of force and not by natural development, and do so without amending the Constitution. At that time, President Václav Havel and a group of senators turned to the Constitutional Court, which subsequently rejected a majority of already enacted amendments as anti-constitutional. You can imagine how bitter some of the strongest politicians and their party formations were as a result. 2 years ago, the Constitutional Court ruled that the way how the Chamber of Deputies itself shortened its term of office was anti-constitutional. At that time, it seemed again to the two decisive political parties that it would be better for them to hold election as soon as possible and not on a term stipulated by the Constitution. They therefore themselves tried to choose an election date that would be suitable for them. They tried to do it by means of an act that they called constitutional, even thought it neither changed nor amended the Constitution, but merely stood next to the Constitution. It was as thought the Constitution did not exist for them for a certain period of time. The subsequent decision of the Constitutional Court again caused upheaval and indignation among the strongest political parties because they again strived to significantly change the political system by this move, in the same direction like 10 years ago at the time of the opposition treaty. Those calling for an amendment to the Constitution could be heard even louder back then. Their aim was to weaken the powers of the Constitutional Court so that it could next time no longer interfere in the struggle for power. Again, the loudest voices came from the Prague Castle. Warnings against aristocracy, saying that the Constitutional Court has allegedly becoming a third parliamentary chamber, also grew louder then. I am one of those who reject those arguments. On the contrary, I believe that we can still find inspiration in the United States as regards the position of the system of justice in the constitutional and political system. In spite of all significant differences, in the United States there is a presidential system, in a federation. A strong and independent justice system serves as a relatively most reliable guarantee of democracy and civil rights. In your country, not only the Supreme Court, but also any court may judge whether this or that act is or is not in compliance with the Constitution. Even thought the dispute usually ends at the Supreme Court, I admire it as an achievement. It is often thought that the most important guarantee of freedom is the division of power. It means the system of checks and balances, which was for the first time brought to life by your Constitution. But even this system has to be protected by someone in specific disputes concerning its interpretation. However, the above is not the only inspiration. Nowadays, we also have to finalize the structure and internal relationships within the public prosecuting office system. Independence of the justice system as a whole of the executive power, especially to the Ministry of Justice, is insufficiently guaranteed in the Czech Republic. Public prosecuting offices are currently the weakest link of independent justice. The public prosecuting offices are, unfortunately, a rather impenetrable sieve, which should, however, be permeable from the police to courts. This is one of the reasons why the Czech Republic is more and more disenchanted by unresolved cases which imply corruption even at the highest places. 22 years ago, we could see the sign Soviet Union, our patron, Sovětský svaz, náš vzor, almost on every corner. Our people are thus oversensitive to any analogies of this motto. This is why I am presenting to you purely prosaic and practical ideas about the American inspiration in some areas of the political and constitutional life. The United States is not the pattern that the USSR used to be, and constitutional concepts are not transferable. Americans know the best after the experience from a number of countries, namely Latin American ones, which took over the US constitutional model or directly its diction and ended up in a lengthy series of dictatorships. Democracy is not a commodity that can be exported easily, which, however, does not mean that there can be no inspiration. Today, I am therefore simply talking about an inspiration, which I see as highly topical and practical. When I accepted your invitation, I thought that the friends of the Czech Republic and friends of Slovak Republic should be informed about our concerns and our interest in the American experience. In particular, now, when we find ourselves in a situation in which representative democracy is more or less everywhere losing credibility and trust. Undoubtedly, it has not lost it as yet. On this occasion, I have therefore decided not to speak only on a festive note and rather talk about how a stronger, self-confident, and naturally also more independent system of justice can help representative democracy regain trust. How can it be achieved? The system of justice can do so by more rigorously and efficiently guarding it against attempts at changing it, mainly by limiting the powers of the Constitutional Court. It can also be done by refusing to strengthen control, albeit indirect one, exercised by the executive power over the whole system of justice. However, our deputies, but maybe also your congressmen and congresswomen, may not like that at all. We have to take into account this task is not only up to politicians. It is a task for the whole society, for everybody who tries to raise legal awareness. A self-confident and strong system of justice requires also self-confident and mainly morally strong judges and public prosecuting officers who will not take heed of interests of political parties or governments. Let me now go back to a fairly recent past to further explain what I refer to as inspiration, how it was manifested. Soon after November 1989, several American constitutional lawyers went to the Czech Republic and offered their help with the preparation of a new constitution. I would like to mention a few names here. For instance, Lloyd Cutler, Lawrence Tribe, Dick Howard, or William Coleman. One of them, our compatriot Erich Stein, one of the founders of the European law teaching, who passed away aged almost 100 years this summer, wrote a poignant analysis of the disintegration of Czechoslovakia. For the first 2 years, we followed the old socialist constitution because we wanted the new one to be federal one. At least I was one of those who wanted that. We were obsessed with defining relationships between a federation and republics, because without that it was impossible to proceed further. Then, in summer, when it was clear that we would not agree on the definitions of relation of the two republics and the federation, it was evident that our joint state would be divided. So a constitution of the yet non-existent Czech Republic started to be prepared in a great haste and in a much improvised manner. Center-right oriented conservatives participated in the process, but there was only a minimum of constitutional lawyers. Those were actually hard to find back then if you wished to have experts with fairly clean hands at the same time. No Federalist papers were written at that time. The Constitution had to be ready in just a couple of months. The independent Czech state, which had not originally been foreseen, had to be hastily provided with a constitution. I am afraid that the American constitutional lawyers, who had been willing to share their advice and experience, did not have much say given the pragmatic terms of reference. Nevertheless, that does not mean that they do not deserve our thanks, albeit belatedly. However, in the end, the result was surprisingly good, even without their contribution. I believe that it was so mainly because we agreed that the Constitution would be concise. It means open to future developments through judicial interpretation. It was also important that it incorporated into the constitutional system the Senate as well as the Constitutional Court, and that the Senate was granted a major say in appointing members of that court. The American inspiration was clear in that respect. Now, after almost 20 years, I can say that this has proven to be the most important feature. However, haste also played a role. There was simply no time to write a detailed constitution, which at the time weak left-wingers wished to have, and which would be similar to the one written by, for example, cautious Portuguese after the fall of the authoritarian regime. The American inspiration was followed largely thanks to the late constitutional judge Wojciech Cepel, my friend and my former colleague from the Department of Theory of the State and Law at the Faculty of Law in Prague during the 60s. The above department was disbanded after the occupation of our country. I am sure that many of you have known Wojciech Cepel. After November 1989, he lectured at several American universities, and he became familiar with the U.S. approach to law that follows from natural law. He was one of the greatest admirers of the United States, among other things, on the waves of Radio Free Europe when it relocated to Prague. I just wanted to pay tribute to him in front of this audience. Our Constitution has proven well, among other things, also because of the reason that the first 15 judges of the Constitutional Court were appointed by Václav Havel, who precisely understood its meaning. Judges are appointed in the Czech Republic for a 10-year term and not for life, as it is done, for instance, in the United States. The people who prepared the Constitution decided to limit their mandate, presumably because they were rather cautious. After half a century of undemocratic conditions, nobody could be sure if the first appointed judges would be the right ones. Today, we more or less agree that Constitutional Court judges should be appointed only once. This means that nowadays our third Constitutional Court representatives will start to be nominated gradually in the forthcoming weeks and months by the incumbent president. New judges will be nominated after the present ones resign, pass away, or after their mandate simply comes to an end. Havel's courts, as it used to be called, naturally with a bit of exaggeration, laid down solid and healthy foundations of the Constitutional Court system inspired by the United States. For the first time, it started to follow also the principles of natural law, at least in certain disputes. This was not and still is not common at all in continental law, in particular in the sphere of German, mostly positivistic or normativistic-oriented law. I have already mentioned that our Constitution will in 1 year celebrate 20 years. I am glad that we have it as it is, including its American inspiration. In times of growing unrest, uncertainty, and tension not only in both our societies, it is a relatively reliable guarantee that we will not lose the freedoms that are dear to us and that our constitutional institutions will survive also under worse weather conditions. In the end, constitutions are not written just for bright and sunny days. The foundations of our Constitution are healthy. I would say they are even healthier than our society and the world of our present politicians, who are still recovering from half a century of non-democratic conditions. Provided we know how to use the Constitution, provided we are not afraid to use it, and in particular, provided we resist to attempt to rob it, to exaggerate slightly, of its American features, freedom in general as well as the freedom of people and citizens does not need to be at risk even in the hard times ahead. Not even our future needs, therefore, to be at risk. Besides, it is true that only free people find a way out of the economic crisis and a crisis of democracy. Thank you for your attention.
For a minute. I think we have time for one or two questions, and then we'll proceed for a little ceremony here at the end. Yes, Ambassador Russell. A microphone will be given to you.
Senator, thank you.
The other end.
The other way would help.
Yeah.
Is it on? Okay. Senator, thank you for your very challenging but ultimately, I think, hopeful remarks. But I have a historical question. Having served in Prague during the Velvet Revolution, I know that you were heavily involved in the 1992 talks about the future of the Federation and worked very hard on that. What, in your view, was the fundamental reason for the ultimate failure of those talks?
Already at that time, I decided not to say that or Czechs or Slovaks were responsible for the dissolution of the state. They were strong motives on Czech side and strong motives on Slovak side, which cannot be easily compared. I was not against the Slovak will, the will of Slovak representation, to be precise, but it seemed to me that we have a duty to use all possible model, all possible means, all possible means. Now I am sure that we did not use all possible means. This lack of patience and steadiness, for me, it's one of my worst political experience. Not the result. Maybe the result was inevitable, but the way to the result was marked by impatience and populism on both sides. Now it's over. Only older people are returning still to that time, but of course we have to respect the fact of the two independent states. I would say independent in the frame of Europe. That's another question.
And another longer lecture. We have time for one more question. Yes, Zed. No, take the mic. Yep.
I hope this is not an inappropriate question, but would you consider running for president to succeed Václav Klaus?
I might say that Dr. David here is a scholar at the Woodrow Wilson Center, and he goes right to the heart of it.
From the dissolving of civic forum and civic movement as a následovník, civic successor. From that time, I am member of the relatively small Christian Democratic Party, which is parliamentary party because there is 6 senators and no deputies. So I am sure that next time, it means in March 2013, the election of president will be again matter of political parties. From that point of view, I have no chance. I try it once 9 years ago, and it seems to me, in America, it's not this. There are politicians trying it again and again, but for me, it's enough, I would say.
Thank you very much, Senator Pithart. I wanted to announce that we're going to now have a presentation of a medal and certificate to the senator by the chairman and president of Friends of the Czech Republic and Friends of Slovakia, as well as Ambassador Gondelovich and Ambassador Burian. Can you come forward, please?
As president of the American Friends of the Czech Republic and an old friend of Senator Pithart, first let me thank you for being so thoughtful and so honest. We love both qualities and we miss them desperately here in the United States. I'm joined up here, by Ambassador Cabanis and other directors of the American Friends of the Czech Republic and then Friends of Slovakia, and it's always good to join hands. First of all, on behalf of our two organizations, we have a certificate of appreciation, and maybe you want to read it. Since I've got the real key.
Certificate of Appreciation awarded to Senator Petr Pithart, Senate of the Parliament of the Czech Republic. In grateful appreciation for the promotion and understanding of the Czech and Slovak legacy in the struggle for freedom, overcoming 50 years of foreign domination and emerging as free, secure, and democratic nations. Freedom Lecture Series.
But we don't want you to go home with just that piece of paper. We would like to present to you our contribution and to thank you for the lecture, and hopefully this can be used appropriately by you in your thoughtful and honest way. And I'm disappointed to hear that you think that you can't run for president. I've been told and learned by my own experience that one never says never. And I know you will be pragmatic and you will think this through. So thank you, Mr. Van Dusen, for hosting us one more time, and thank you for your leadership of this important Wilson Center organization here in Washington. So it's another good day, and I'm glad you're here. And one more gift.
Senator, thank you so much for your remarks, and thank you above all for your contribution to restoring the rule of law for the Czechs and Slovaks after a 50-year, very dark period. So, Friends of Slovakia would like to present you with our Medal of Honor, and I will show you it pictures General Milan Rostislav Štěpánek, one of the founders of Czechoslovakia, and the American Eagle, and we hope you will take that home with you.
Thank you all very much, and Senator, I guess this should be registered as the first contribution to your election kitty. Thank you all for being here, and you're welcome at the Woodrow Wilson Center anytime. Thank you.